Brain curiosity of the human species has accelerated in the last 30 years. With the development of brain imaging technologies, we have had more information about the brain than expected. Although it started in the 1980s, the realization that learning is the center of the brain excited not only field specialists, but also educators, pedagogues, psychologists and sociologists. Thus, the brain started to be one of the most interesting and curious subjects in many fields of science. American neurosurgeon Frank Vertosik Jr., author of When the Air Hits Your Brain, Tales of Neurosurgery. It uses the definition of an oily organ weighing 1 to 2 kilograms for the brain. Thinking that this explanation would lead to belittling the brain, he continues, "It is a miracle that the soul is a rare fabric, woven with nerve threads." Indeed, when the brain is examined, it stands out as a small example of the systems in the universe. The brain is holistic, like the universe, and its relationships are organized and systematic. Every 100 billion neurons are interrelated, just like every star in the sky, every single substance on Earth. What is the brain like? He is the theoretician of the triple brain model and examines the relationships between behavior and brain. Research by Paul MacLean determined that people perceive the world with 3 different brains that their own and their reactions are different. MacLean summed up his research with the following sentences: "These 3 separate brains can be thought of as 3 separate biocomputers connected together. Each has its own function of place, time, intelligence and memory." Mr. Images taken with the development of brain imaging techniques clearly show what is happening on the inner surface of the brain. Findings he confirms what MacLean said. Accordingly, there is a 3-layer structure in the brain. These, starting from the top of the spinal cord is the brain stem, limbic system and cerebrum. If we consider the brain stem as a central nucleus, this nucleus is surrounded by the limbic system, while the third external environment is the cerebrum consisting of 2 hemispheres. Brainstem located in the lower part of the brain, responsible for breathing, blood pressure and heartbeat. The nerve pathways that provide communication between the brain and the body pass through the medulla, a part of the brain stem. After these nerve fibers cross the brainstem, they turn to the right and left parts of the body, in contrast to the brain lobe they come from. Thus, the right part of our left lobe body in the cerebrum, the right lobe rules the left part of our body. Limbic system. Another important part of the brain is the limbic system called the midbrain, which is also found in all vertebrates. This system is the most basic region of learning, memory. Because our emotions, motives and memory processes that prepare us for learning take place here. The limbic system has 3 separate structures. These are, the hippocampus as the amygdala and the hypothalamus. What we should especially know here is that the hippocampus is effective in the execution of memory functions. It is natural for a person whose hippocampus is damaged to experience memory loss. It is no longer possible to learn anything new. Amygdala, on the other hand, is effective in regulating and controlling emotions. The amygdala region activates what we want to keep in mind in memory, and ensures that it is written. The hypothalamus controls our urges such as eating, drinking water and sexuality. Cerebrum is. It is the outermost region that makes up 2/3 of our brains and is also designated as the brain shell. It is also called cortex. Cerebrum cortex is responsible for performing high-level cognitive and emotional functions. It generally symbolizes the brain with its walnut-like structure. The brain has a structure that thinks the cortex and creates neural networks in itself as we think. The most important feature of the cerebrum is that it has right and left brain lobes, hemisphere, which is a notebook in which a kind of learned and what should be kept in memory is written. In a way, we can also say a mel book or mind palace. These 2 brain hemispheres are symmetrical and connected to each other by nerve fibers called corpus callosum. The meaning of this bond is that my body manages our body and especially our learning appropriately through the autonomic nervous system, which is then crossover left and right across the brainstem. As a matter of fact, Roger Sperry, Joseph Bogan and Michael Gazzaniga, who won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for their research and findings on brain hemispheres and functions at the California Institute of Technology, started the brain age. Below we will return to these 2 hemisphere issues. Frontal, parietal, occipital, temporal lobular. There are 4 different lobes according to the directions of the brain. These 4 lobes are located in the 2 right and left lobes of the brain. Of these, the frontal lobe is active in cognitive activities such as planning, decision-making, and goal setting. The parietal lobe, side lobe, collects and organizes information from sensory receptors in the skin, muscles and joints. The map follows, provides navigation and understands spatial descriptions. The occipital lobe, articular lobe, processes visual information, organizes colors, shapes and movements. There is also the temporal lobe, processes information about hearing, shows the language comprehension and comprehension connections. Brain hemispheres and corpus callosum. The history of the work on the corpus callosum is quite new. There was no surgical intervention on the brain until the 1960s. At first, the paralysis that came to the soldiers who were injured in the head attracted attention, because the soldiers who were hit by the right side of the skull had paralysis on the left side of the body, and those who were hit on the left skull were paralyzed on the right side of their body. One of them was the soldier named W.J. who survived wounded among his friends who died in World War II. This soldier was wounded in his head and had a stroke in his body. Efforts to improve W.J. continued after the war, but with no positive results. On the contrary, paralysis spread throughout the body. Scientists were puzzled. It was normal for the W.J., who was injured on the left side, to have a stroke on the right side of his body. Why was this paralysis spread to the left side of the body? Scientists of the end realized that the left lobe of the injured brain adversely affected the right lobe, threatening the part of the body to become paralyzed, and they decided to separate these two lobes. Thus, W.J. became the first patient to separate two brain lobes by surgery. The brain of W.J. would of course be made by cutting dense nerve fibers called corpus callosum. Thus, the spread of the wound on one side of the brain on the other will be prevented. The spread of paralysis to the body would also stop. S brain would of course be realized by cutting dense nerve fibers called corpus callosum. Thus, the spread of the wound on one side of the brain on the other will be prevented. The spread of paralysis to the body would also stop. S brain would of course be realized by cutting dense nerve fibers called corpus callosum. Thus, the spread of the wound on one side of the brain on the other will be prevented. The spread of paralysis to the body would also stop. This incident served to explain many behaviors about brain lobes, both in terms of brain research and learning and education. It made a breakthrough especially in education and memory methods. The scientist's invention was as follows. The corpus callosum bundle, consisting of dense nerve fibers, served as a bridge that allows continuous exchange of information between the right and left lobes of the brain. When the corpus callosum was interrupted, the communication between these two lobes was interrupted and therefore no exchange of information between them was possible. Scientists have focused on the functions of these two lobes of the brain through the new situation that has emerged. As a result of complex tests, they obtained findings on which process occurred in which right lobe of the brain and which ones were in the left lobe of the brain. The results were really interesting. The specialization of each lobe of the brain was different, and the way they processed the information was not the same. Learning and right lobe, left lobe truth. As a result of many tests, it was determined that 95% of the population's left lobe was superior in terms of speech, mathematical operations, sequences, numbers, and analysis, and that it worked logically and linearly. Similarly, functions such as rhythm, imagination, colors, size, volume, and music were performed in the right lobe of the majority. Academic investments are made in the left brains of children in education-oriented countries such as our country, and their right brain functions are neglected. This situation actually means that if the age progresses, the right brain is destroyed. The fact that the age group that uses the right brain most effectively is children, due to the fact that we learned better when we were children. As a child, we used both lobes together effectively, on the one hand, while dreaming, on the other, we were associating both lobes. As we grew up, by misinterpreting the professions we acquired due to specialization, we have become doomed to a single lobby. Research about the recognition and details of the brain has led to new breakthroughs in the context of education and learning. In this framework, especially brain-based learning studies became popular. It turned out that the education and learning to be given with a learning method suitable for the brain's own nature is faster and permanent. In particular, the need to use two brain lobes together during learning became evident. Mega Memory World Memory Champion started this work in Turkey. Melek Dyer. According to Melik Dyer, the first step in increasing our learning and memory capacity is to know what to expect separately from both lobes of the brain. Regardless of the subject we learned, fast and permanent learning can be achieved by using both lobes together. Especially families that invest in the left brain, schools and education system neglects the right lobe, so the functions of this lobe must be used with the left lobe. According to Melik Dyer, the imagination should not be avoided, because it is a fact that people who can use the right lobe effectively develop the requirements of the left lobe using their imagination. Learning and nerve cells. It is a necessity for a person who has a brain capital with more than 100 billion neurons, nerve cells, to use his brain effectively. The link between learning and brain cells is very important. Brain cells die if they are not used with activities such as learning. No new ones are created to replace the dead cells. Every information, data, learned through the right and left lobes is protected in neurons, and a magnificent lattice is formed in our brain through axons and decepts that connect neurons as each memory of memory with each new information learned is established. We can compare the process of establishing a connection between nerve cells by pulling a telephone line between the houses. Let's assume that people who don't know each other are laying telephone lines between their homes to meet more often when they meet. As a result of the telephone lines to be drawn with each new meeting, a network layer will be created at that location. The same goes for the communication we have with every new person we meet. This is called a personal network. The name of the environmental expansion was networking. In social life, especially with the development of communication technologies, networking tools such as Facebook, Google, YouTube make you a part of social life. Think. If we expand the circle like this, isn't every human being part of such a network within this world and this universe? Read. The integrity of the brain, the totality in perception, and the use of the brain as a whole in learning is not suitable for the Creator's system in the universe. So what needs to be done is to return to basic learning. The brain of people who networking between brain cells using learning and memory power is more developed. They are positive, self-confident, virtuous, highly communicative, respected and respectful, intellectual, able to find solutions to problems, accommodating, intelligent, strong and willing to focus. Why is that? Because these people use both brain lobes together, establishes a systematic, organized and widespread network among brain cells. In short, they use their brain effectively as described above. So we can say that man is as much human as he can use his brain.